Okay, fantastic. So the topic today is why do we need to develop electronic manufacturing in Kenya? Um, and I hope to answer that question to you categorically. So a little bit about myself. I grew up in Kenya, and I went to the United States for my education and most of my career, which was in manufacturing, but automotive in the automotive sector, building machines and uh, parts for the automotive sector, and then transitioning into electronic manufacturing assembly in Indiana with a company called United Technologies, electronic controls. And then later, when I moved back to Kenya, I've been doing quite a bit of Lean Six Sigma process improvement consulting, not only here in Kenya, but Uganda and South Africa as well. All right, so our agenda for the day, we're going to answer three questions. One, we're going to understand what is the state of electronics manufacturing on the continent. We need to say where does Kenya fit into that puzzle? And then the last thing that we'll talk about is what do we as Gearbox bring to solve that challenge? So the first question is, what is the state of electronics manufacturing in Kenya? And this, I think we will look at just this first statement here, and just to understand where is value or created in the world. So just 10 countries account for 90% of all global patents, 70% of all exports. And this is directly associated with what's called ADP, or advanced digital production, right? Now, this technology is what is driving the fourth industrial revolution. So when we're talking about electronic controls, we're talking about machine learning and AI and everything that revolves around that. Just 10 countries in the world are involved in that. Now, when we're talking about Africa, we currently have little to no involvement in the advanced innovation. And that could be either as a user or a consumer or a producer. And this information is coming from a UNIDA report that really just tells us where Africa stands as far as the fourth industrial revolution. So this is something we need to think about as we talk about the webinar today, as we go through. So what this infographic shows is the proportion of total manufacturing value add in industry that is medium or high technology. So if you look at where Kenya or East Africa is, we're at about 20%. And the countries that are actually producing 30 or 40% are in South Africa, Nigeria, and then towards North Africa. So it tells us that there's a huge gap as far as adding value, especially with technology. I'm sure you've heard about this term, digital transformation, and why it's so important. Now, to put this into the context of us on the continent, is how are we going to leapfrog from where we are currently, be it in the manufacturing sector, in the service sector, in the finance sector, how are we going to get there? And the fourth industrial revolution and digital transformation actually could provide that leap for us. So what I've highlighted in red are really key statements that I think we need to remember as we go forth from today. So digital transformation can lead to significant advancements. So the development of smart machines, smart platforms, and digital products. So if you live in Kenya, you are well aware of the ubiquity of the M-Pesa digital payment system. So this is one area that we're leading as Kenya, and the continent is leading in mobile payments. And even though Kenya is one of the leaders, the rest of the continent is catching up there. Then the other statement says, there are specific digital dividends observed that may counteract economic equality. So above local average labor wages, new markets for digital startups, and digital platforms that can provide an escape route to ineffective, corrupt markets and labor institutions. So if you live in Africa, you live with this every day, right? You live with markets that are not efficient. We live with, if you're a startup, you have to go through tremendous hurdles just to get your product to market. And once it's to market, you're going through even more hurdles to try to get it across Africa, right? So digital transformation can really help with this. So I want to now shift our focus now to what we're calling the electronics global value chain. And this is just the chain of how electronics is created. So this chain has gone through three specific phases. The first phase was late 70s into the 80s, which was the age of offshoring. So companies that were based in the West, so the US, Western Europe, Japan, started moving their electronic manufacturing chains to China and Taiwan. And this shift was really driven by lower labor costs, right? So from the 80s all the way up to the 2000s, that was the major push. And what China did in that time frame was actually consolidate all of this manufacturing know-how into a giant manufacturing hub in Shenzhen, right? And that's something that has worked extremely well for them. So what happened in the 2000s? Then that's, if you recall, that's the advent of the mobile phone. So what the mobile phone did to electronic devices was actually shorten the product life cycle. And what this did to the manufacturers or the producers of these products was realize that they need to be closer to their customers to be able to react faster as far as customer demands and customers' taste is concerned. So what you saw was a shift away from China, but setting up regional hubs closer to where customers are. So for example, Mexico is a regional hub to serve the North American region. Brazil is a regional hub to serve South America. Eastern Europe was a regional hub to serve Western Europe. And then most recently, India and Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia are regional hubs as well. So these regional hubs are closer to where the customers are, but in an area where the labor is still much lower than where the main customers are. So that is now the age of nearshoring. So what is happening now in 2020 and or 2021 and what's happening beyond? So now we're actually moving into the age of reshoring. And reshoring means that any manufacturing that went away due to looking for lower labor costs is actually going to be moving back. And this is moving back purely due to the cause of, or the benefits that industry is reaping out of the fourth industrial revolution. So when you have machine learning, automation, that mitigates the high labor costs that you would have. So if you look at the US right now, the manufacturing is actually on an upward trend because manufacturing is moving back just because of the fourth industrial revolution. So from an African context, what does this mean for us is that we were left out in the 80s from offshoring. Right? We didn't have the technical capability to do any sort of electronics manufacturing. We were left out during nearshoring, mainly because maybe nobody realized that we have a market for consumer products and electronics, or we have a market for electronics. But more importantly for us is that if we don't do anything now, we are going to be left out again when we go into the next age of reshoring. So we have this opportunity, and this opportunity is not infinite, it's time bound, right? And if we don't do anything to build this capability, we are going to be left out again, and continue to be consumers and not producers, right? So it means that we can't leverage on our innovation, we can't protect our innovation because we don't have any internal capability. This slide brings to mind exactly what I was talking about. We're going to be left out. So it's talking about what is the impact of automation to furniture manufacturing, for an instance, and it's showing furniture manufacturing in the US versus, or US wages versus Kenyan wages, right? And at what point will it be that robots in Kenya will actually, it'll make more sense to manufacture with robots in Kenya versus actually using wages, right? So if you look at where we are right now, 2021, the US is actually getting to an inflection point where the wages and the cost of robots are meeting, right? Which means that this is exactly what I was talking about reshoring, right? So robots will be cheaper than actual human production. Right? So for us, when we look at Kenya, as in terms of furniture manufacturing, this point will happen in 2034. And that is not a long way away. That's just 13 years away, and that goes by in the blink of an eye. And especially if you don't do anything to build that capability, it'll be gone much, much faster than that. So this really brings to point that it is happening, and it's happening now. So we need to do something about that. Let's understand. So we know we have a time-bound opportunity. So what do we need to do? What do we need to make when we're talking about electronics manufacturing? So we need to understand who holds a value when we're making electronics. Now, there are three main players, or actually two main players in electronics manufacturing. They're what we call the lead firms. So the lead firms are the companies that do the design, the companies that own the IP in the electronics. And then you have companies who are the contract manufacturers, or another term for them is an electronic manufacturing service provider, or an EMS, right? And then on top of the lead firm is who you have as what we call a platform leader, right? So Microsoft, Intel, Google, etc. If we only look at the manufacturing portion of the global value of the value chain in electronics, the manufacturing portion is less than 7%. And this is the entire manufacturing portion, right? If we just consider the basic assembly that we are doing in the country, for example, in the laptop project, that is less than 1% of the total value, right? Okay. So what do we want to do? We don't want to be stuck in just manufacturing, because if you're in manufacturing, you will get squeezed on both sides. You will get squeezed by the lead firm who owns the design and the IP, and you'll also get squeezed by the lead firm who usually owns a distribution and after sales service. So you need to pick a product or sector that allows you to leverage or upgrade higher in that value chain. Otherwise, we will not succeed. So here's an example of why we don't want to do manufacturing. And this happened multiple times across the world. This is an example in Brazil. So in 2011, Brazil gave a bunch of subsidies and tax benefits for Foxconn, who is the EMS provider for Apple, to set up manufacturing plants in Brazil. So this is worth $12 billion. It was to create 100,000 jobs, kickstart Brazil as the EMS hubs. However, in 2017, 6 years later, Foxconn realizes that it doesn't make business sense for us to be in Brazil, so they pull out. So what does that leave for Brazil? You know, you've given a lot of benefits to create, hopefully, what you thought would create or spark a new sector, but at the end, you're left without that. So again, you don't want to just do manufacturing. You want to do more than that. We need to do more than just the chain. So I want us to just think about this when we look at this information from UNIDO's Competitive Industrial Performance Index, a CP index of 2020. So what this chart tells us is, out of all the manufacturing that each country does, how does that rank? Is it a resource-based manufacturing? Is it low tech? Is it medium tech? Is it high tech, right? And then it ranks each country out of 152 countries that participated in the survey. So Kenya's ranking 115th out of 152. South Africa tops the list, and Ethiopia for us is at 134. But if we look at the percentage of high tech and medium tech between South Africa, Nigeria, and Ethiopia, and you compare that to Kenya, even though Kenya is ranking higher than Ethiopia, if we look at where are we going from medium tech and high tech, we are at a huge risk, right? We're not developing any value add or trying to move up and develop more smart manufacturing. We're still on the low end of that manufacturing part, right? So maybe we might be competitive currently, but future-proofing we are not. So we are at risk. So we have something to do. The impetus is on us to do something to change that. Let's look at what exists as far as electronic manufacturing capability on the continent. So we have essentially countries with developed capabilities, countries with developing capabilities, and those are the countries that are highlighted in red, and then countries without any capability at all. So if we look at South Africa, Egypt, and the north of Africa, those are countries with well-developed manufacturing capabilities. Out of all of them, South Africa's had the longest, a well-developed market, which provides electronics for their own consumption, as well as export, especially in highly specialized sectors such as military and that. North Africa, interestingly, is actually now turning out to be a nearshoring hub for Europe. Now, remember in my last a few slides back, I had mentioned that Eastern Europe was set up to be a nearshoring hub for Western Europe. Now, what has happened over time is that the labor in Eastern Europe has gone up. So you're seeing a shift now to move to lower labor markets in North Africa to support Europe across the Mediterranean, which then goes to show that it's very easy to be disrupted if you're only focused on just doing manufacturing, right? Let's look at the countries who are developing electronic manufacturing capabilities. So we have Nigeria, Ethiopia, Uganda, and we focus on those. In these countries, what is happening as far as electronics is concerned is basic assembly. So taking what is known as a semi-knockdown kit, or SKD, which is essentially all the parts that you need to make a device, and then just assemble them together. So if you were to disassemble your laptop and have it into pieces, that essentially is a SKD, right? So the skill required to put that together, while it is a skill, from an advanced or technological skill, it is not that high, right? If we look at Rwanda, Rwanda in 2019 just had set up a full manufacturing line to build phones. And this is the company called the Mara Phone Group, right? Now, what they're doing is they're building phones in a product that you're competing against other the lead firms who have the IP for that product. So it doesn't seem like it's a great place to be, even though we need phones on the continent. When you're looking at it from a point of disruption or being disrupted out of that, it's high risk, right? So you don't want to make phones. You want to do something that is more innovative and puts you in a place where you can't be disrupted against. Now let's focus on Kenya. Now, Kenya actually over the last couple of years, and this is happening by happenstance, it's turning out to be the regional hub for electronics manufacturing. And we'll see this a little bit more, but Kenya is developing not only in a semi-knockdown assembly, as far as what we're seeing with the laptop project at Moi University, Jomo Kenyatta Technical University, and then what's coming soon is Dedan Kimathi University. But also we're now developing the full electronic manufacturing capability, which includes technology called surface mount technology, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. So Kenya is kind of in the lead with that. So you may ask, how come nobody's done any electronics manufacturing on the continent? Why is that happening? So there are several challenges there. One is just having that production capability to absorb these advanced digital production products or technologies that you're using. Kenya is a good example of the second point, where technology, if you invest in this technology, which Kenya did quite a bit in the 80s and I'd say probably the 80s, once you've invested in that, it's very difficult for you to try to invest in something else, right? Or get the new technology, because you're trying to get your ROI. So for us, it's to understand how do we retrofit and integrate new technologies into manufacturing. And this speaks highly, especially what's happening in manufacturing right now. If I compare what I've seen in Kenya as far as manufacturing, and I compare it to what I saw in South Africa and compare that to what I experienced in the United States, the manufacturing in Kenya is at about where the US manufacturing was in the early 90s, as an industry as a whole, right? So we need to really make that leap forward in our manufacturing areas. And then of course, electronics manufacturing requires substantial infrastructure investment, right? And then last but not least, our supply chains are somewhat siloed, right? And this speaks even more as far as advanced digital production, where we don't have interconnected supply chains. And this is reason why China and Shenzhen is so popular, is that a supply chain is really interconnected, which means that you have access to whatever you need and multiple suppliers to help you solve the problem that you're trying to create. So these are the challenges that we have. So let's talk about Kenya. Are we a regional leader in hardware development? I want us to just quickly understand what can we make, right? So we could make home appliances, we could make phones, we could make laptops, we could make ECUs for cars. But in all of these, we could make them, but we wouldn't own the IP to them, which means that we'd be at risk to be disrupted. However, if we focus on IoT, so be it smart farming or anything to do with pay as you go, we can create the IP and own the IP and be able to own that entire value chain. So what IoT does for us, it allows us to have African designed hardware solutions that solve hard African problems, right? And over time, we can then say we're moving from IoT into phones, into home appliances, but coming from a point of knowledge and saying, okay, this home appliance, we need to design it in such a way and be innovative that will meet our needs on the continent. What's happening in the IoT space in Kenya? We have about a threefold increase in companies that deploy IoT devices. Right? And this is threefold over the last 5 years. So there's a lot of interest and energy and resources going into developing IoT. And if you look at the IoT demand, pay as you go is the highest of that. And why is that? Because it's solving a problem that people need. Right? When we look at value, why would we want to do electronic manufacturing? We just need to look at the value for IoT in Middle East, East Africa by 2023. This was projected by IDC, and this is going to be $18 billion. So it's definitely a market that we want to invest in to develop that capability, right? And maximize the value add that we are creating. Let's talk about what's happening in our country right now with IoT, right? So there are four main segments where we're seeing a lot of interest. Number one, healthcare. And this is driven by the state that we're in right now with the pandemic, right? We don't have enough ventilators. We don't have enough, whatever it might be. So how can we innovate to create or augment the solutions that are there with things that make sense for us on the continent, right? Agriculture. Kenya cannot feed itself as a country, right? We have to import food, yet we have more than enough arable land to feed ourselves. So how do we create smart farming to improve the output of our agriculture? Pay as you go is, as I mentioned on the last slide, the fastest growing segment in IoT. And what does pay as you go provide? It provides access to services to people who need them, but couldn't afford them before the fourth industrial revolution. And this example from Pago Energies is great, right? Prior to this, somebody who was living on the margins would have to pay for kerosene or charcoal to cook their daily meal. And those are, not only are they expensive, but they're also not good health-wise, right? But LPG is cheaper than kerosene and charcoal and provides a much better cooking experience. And by having an IoT device, you can actually pay for the gas that you're using at the time you need it, right? Which allows you to plan better, especially when you're working on a very tiny fixed budget. And I would actually say somebody who's using a pay-as-you-go LPG system gets better service than I do, because before their gas runs out, they already have a replacement cylinder delivered to their door. Whereas for us who order the cylinder, you pay for the full cylinder, it runs out, you have to call somebody to deliver that to you. So there's a point of time where you're running out of gas, right? Utilities is a huge area where we can add value, right? In terms of how do we monitor our energy? How do we distribute our energy? How do we create smart networks that can augment existing power with renewable energy, right? So there's a lot of interesting work happening around utility. And what else is coming? So we know electric mobility is going to come sooner or later. And I mean, we can feel it in our wallets, in our pockets, when the fuel price goes up in Kenya, right? So we know that there's a need to develop EVs in the country, and there are already multiple startups doing that. So this is innovation being created in the country right now, right? But how can we help the companies that are innovating be able to reduce the product development time? As I mentioned, Kenya, just by happenstance again, is turning out to be a leader in electronics manufacturing, right? From the universities that partnered with the digital learning program to assemble laptops, to Gearbox actually being the third full manufacturing service in the country, right? The first two, the pioneers as they were, is a company in Nyeri called Ecus, and then a company in Nairobi called Numeral IoT, which are adding value to our economy by building speed governors, building, building IoT devices, right? So they recognize the need and they're filling that need by investing in that equipment. Right? So just by this, again, by the government not doing much, we're turning out to be a leader. Right? So what do we expect if we invest in electronics manufacturing? Right? What do we expect what are the outputs from what we call advanced digital production, right? We'll get new and better products, we'll increase our production efficiency, so reducing costs, cost of production, increasing the output. We'll get better models, we'll have new solutions for marginalized groups, right? Especially pay-as-you-go, right? And then high level, the other values are we own more of that value chain, right? We can create a local supply industry. We have high skilled job creation. Electronics manufacturing requires highly skilled jobs, right? And then we look at it as a whole for Kenya, there is very low competition, right? If you exclude North Africa and South Africa. So that means that the opportunities is there for us to reap. So can Kenya become the next leader? Absolutely, right? We have several things going for us. Technology is at the core of our startup ecosystem, right? We're building out IoT networks from NB-IoT to Sigfox to LoRaWAN, right? Which are more efficient in deploying IoT. We have a large educated youth population. We use mobile payments every day, which reduces that barrier of adopting IoT. And then the government has also realized that this is an important sector, and they're starting to pay attention and to put the regulations in place to help spur that. Of course, they could do more, but a start is we have to start somewhere on that. On this, I'll just say, if we were to pick an example to model ourselves against, what would we do? I would say, let's look at India. In just 4 years, India was able to triple their output of electronic manufacturing production just by looking at the policies that sector uses, right? So we should probably take a leaf out of their book and understand what we can do in our context. So out of all that, let's just focus on what is Gearbox doing to help develop that, right? So we've worked on a joint venture between ourselves, a company called Parable Trust, which owns Europlacer, which is a leading equipment manufacturer based out of the UK, and a UK investment firm to create a high mix, low volume, world-class PCB electronic manufacturing plant. Right? And we're going to help build this ecosystem in 3 ways, right? We want to collaborate with everybody in the system to understand what these problems are that we face, and then innovate around those problems to create best fit solutions, and then propagate those solutions across the continent using Industry 4.0, right? What we're offering really from a customer is really that end-to-end solution. So whether you come in with an idea, we can help design that idea for you, or validate an existing PCBA, manufacture that, test that design, and then deliver that finished goods to you in whatever distribution model that you're thinking about. So that essentially is our product and services portfolio. We are approaching this from a world-class perspective. We are saying it should be no different for you as a customer or somebody who wants to design boards. If you were to compare us with China, because we are meeting all the relevant standards as the rest of the electronic manufacturing community does. So whether be it following ISO standards or IPC standards, which is a specific electronics manufacturing standards, whether it's deploying Lean Six Sigma manufacturing processes, meeting global certification standards and sustainable manufacturing practices, you can be rest assured that what we have is world-class. So that is what we're offering at Gearbox, right? So what you see in front of you is actually our what is known as the SMT manufacturing line for electronics manufacturing. Now, this is a line that is highly flexible, that is geared towards building IoT devices, right? So we understand that we could have myriads of IoT devices. So this line is flexible enough to quickly change from one product to the next and have that throughput that is required to meet the competitive cost, especially when you're comparing production in Kenya versus production in China, right? These machines come from our partner in the UK, and they are at the top of the food chain with regard to highly flexible electronics manufacturing equipment. So again, rest assured that everything that we're doing is world-class. From a prototyping capability, as I mentioned a few slides back, we can walk customers through from prototype right through to the market, right? So we can prototype your designs for you, create the schematics, and this will be linking back to Autodesk and using software like Eagle and Fusion 360. So you're really reducing your product development by doing your electronic design and your mechanical design for your casing at the same time, right? So just to minimize that product development. And then because we now have the capability in country to do this, you don't have to wait for multiple weeks to get your products back into the country, right? And then it allows you, and more powerfully, to quickly iterate from version 1 or from your MVP to your next version and add value to your customers, which is how you will grow and scale as a business. What's our product development roadmap for somebody who wants to develop the products? Really, we break it up into two segments. So we'll take you through a prototype development just to understand what do you need to create from your prototype. Do you need to go through multiple prototypes and validate those prototypes through field testing, and then take that data from your field testing and put that back into your design for manufacturing, which then allows us now to create your products for mass manufacturing. So that is the process that we will follow with our customers. Last but not least, these are some of the partners that we work with. So Gearbox is really focused on working with partners. We realize that's the best way for us to make a huge impact across the industry. So from companies such as Paygo Energy, which was on an earlier slide with the LPG IoT monitor, to companies like Electrotel Microsystem, who is actually working on a smart grid metering system for apartment buildings to be able to monitor incoming power from the county and augmenting that power with renewable energy and providing every tenant in your building a good way to measure your power and pay accordingly via digital means. To companies such as Pregmum, who are working on neonatal monitoring, sun irrigation, quite a few. So we have the experience in really helping multiple companies and startups go through that product development journey. So I think we're almost at the end of our session. So I just want to turn back into our QA, and I would like to answer any questions at all. So I've got a question here from Victor, right? And Victor says, to what extent do you factor the development path and the need of society in your organizations and operations? So by that, I'm assuming that manufacturing activities around the world are geared towards the generations of products which are, by and large, Eurocentric in their conception. Do you think there's a manufacturing niche that can be originated in Kenya, but adopted by the global economy? I believe there's an opportunity for Africa to lead the way beyond merely consumer economics as we know it now. And I guess the closest thing I can equate to this is your reference to IoT. So Victor, I think you answered your own question there. We have to look at our challenges that we face every day when we live on this continent and see how can we use the technologies that are being brought about by the fourth industrial revolution. So be it IoT, be it machine learning, be it AI, to solve those and create, again, African intelligent solutions or intelligent solutions designed in Africa to solve the problems that we have. So even when we look at consumer devices, we need to look at those consumer devices from an African lens, right? If you want a microwave, for example, how can this microwave make more sense to an African customer versus a customer based in South Korea or New Delhi or elsewhere in the world? So it's really on us to understand that. And because we leave these problems every day, the innovation will come from us. So my challenge to all the engineers on this call, let's look inward and understand what the challenges are and leverage this technology that we have available to us as far as machine learning, IoT, to be able to create those innovations, right? And if we create innovations, we create the IP. We own the IP, we own the value chain, which means you can't be disrupted, right? And you can build from that and become now a regional hub for African designed products. So there's a question here from Benson, and he says, how can one join the Academy of Training as a graduate engineer in the electrical field? So Gearbox Academy has a lot of courses that we offer. So you can definitely check out our site there and see what you can do. But also Gearbox offers a lot of attachments and internships to graduate engineers. So you can actually get hands-on. So with regard to the electronic manufacturing line, we are opening up for internships so that you can get hands-on experience on what it takes to build electronic devices, right? Everything that we've learned currently in the country has just been theory, but we need to put that to place. And the more people that I can train to be like me, I mean, if they're 10 or 100 or 1,000 Latifs, I can only imagine what each of those individuals will be able to achieve and drive our economy, not only the Kenya, but East Africa and Africa as a whole. So thank you for that question, Benson. Michael, I would say yes. You asked the question about attachment opportunities. Yes, they are. I would apply if I was you. Just go to the Gearbox website and apply there, and we will go through that process. Right? There's a question, interesting question here from Martin that says, with respect to the value chain, what funding opportunities exist in ideation as a basis for developing IP? So this is kind of a chicken and egg situation, right? You need funding to develop an idea, but you can't develop an idea without funding, right? So you have to really, there's no other way to say this, but you have to invest. You know, you need to, whatever you can come up with to prove your idea or develop something, develop an idea to actually show that this POC, this proof of concept works, to allow somebody else to see that. Because you have to understand, you may see what you may see as a solution, somebody else will not see until you actually have something tangible there. So please visit us at Gearbox. We can help you understand what that process looks like and try to see how we can help you develop your product. And once that is developed, then you can start to see, what do I need to do from a funding standpoint? So thank you for that question, Martin. Okay. Here's an interesting question from Matthew. Matthew says he's a 17-year-old aspiring product designer. How can he tap into Gearbox at my level? And what are the opportunities in terms of tech design in the future? Is it viable to consider working at Gearbox as a product designer, focusing on tech and IoT? So that's fantastic, Matthew. In fact, I wouldn't call you aspiring. You know, you are who you say you are, right? If you are working on your craft right now as a product designer, whether you are at the beginning of your journey or far along your journey like I am, you are a product designer, right? So all it takes for you is just to continue building your skill, getting knowledge from wherever you can, and putting that skill into use from a practical standpoint, right? Build things, turn those things from an idea into something tangible, into something people can hold and use, right? When it comes to IoT, please, again, yes, you can come visit us at Gearbox, but there are also multiple other tech hubs in the country, right? And many of them may be focused on software. But if we show that there's a need for hardware, and hardware is the gap or the bridge between software and the physical world. So if you're developing software, you can't, that software needs to work on hardware, right? So we need hardware engineers. So please reach out to your local hub. If you're not close to Gearbox, and just see how they can help you. And remember, all the hubs in the country work together. We're a network. So if we see there's a need for a particular skill or whatever it might be, we will do our best to try to fill that gap. So thank you for that question, Matthew. Ian, how are we doing on time? Just, I think we're at the hour. Do we have a little bit more time to answer the questions?
Maybe one more question. One more question,
Okay.
then we'll be done. Yeah.
Okay, so I will take, I just want to answer just two questions here. So
okay.
There's a question, a technical question and a regulatory question. So a question by Brian, and Brian says, great presentation. Thank you, sir. He's seen the need for it and he's glad somebody's addressing it. So what he'd like to know, what is the roadmap for full multi-layer PCB, right? As it's incredible to have SMT manufacturing, and the limitation of two-layer board also limits the complexity of work that could be submitted to you. So Brian, with this, As far as and what Brian is referring to, if you're not familiar about electronic manufacturing, is the process to make the bare boards. So the board without any electronic components on it. That process in itself is much more complex and capex intensive than just SMT. So in the short term, what we will do is leverage that supply chain from China. And because shipping boards, they don't take up a lot of space, you can pack them quite tightly, allows us to do that. And in fact, if you look at most of the electronics manufacturing in the world, majority of those bare PCBs come from China. But the value is in adding the electronic components to your board, right? But we are working on seeing what do we need to invest in as far as building the boards is concerned. Just understand that it's quite complex and requires us to understand where the market is so we can invest wisely because our resources are not infinite in there. But if you'd like to have a conversation about that, drop me an email, drop me a call, and we can have a chat. And I'd love to hear how I can help you build your products. And then the last question that I'll take for the day is a question from Mohammed Sharif. So his question is more regulatory. He says, there's potential in Kenya. Are the policies and regulations suitable to encourage growth? What are the main players doing to lobby the government to better conditions and for attractive investors or to attract investors? So this one is critical. For us to grow, especially in electronics manufacturing, the government needs to play a very important role. The first role is understanding or removing the blockages for the supply chain. If you are in manufacturing in Kenya, you understand the pain that it takes to bring in raw materials into the country, right? If the government understands we're competing against China, they need to put in policies to block that. So that's something that we're working on, and it requires many voices to be heard. So the more we can get together as a community of electronic manufacturers, stakeholders within the electronic space, designers, customers, what the view, then we can approach the government to say there's a voice and we need to be heard, and let's do the needful there. Okay, great. So I think we're wrapping up here, and I want to say thank you to Autodesk for putting together this webinar, and hopefully we will do this more in the future where we can actually get into the technicality of electronics manufacturing. Today was just a very high level, and just to loop back onto Autodesk and why there's a linkage to this call. Autodesk software, for example, Eagle and Fusion 360. Is software that is used by a large number of designers and product designers to be able to bridge from an idea to a product, right, in software, and using digital transformation to do that. So it's a great partnership that we have here, and we hope to build that further going forward. So if you'd like to know more about electronics manufacturing, if you want to learn more about the process, please let us know. You can drop us an email and get in touch. And we can cater these webinars to meet the needs that you are facing, whether you are a product designer, an engineer, somebody who's interested in getting into electronics manufacturing, we would love to help. So with that, I will hand over to Ian to close out. Thank you very much. And I look forward to the next session. Thanks.
Thank you, Latif. That was a well done, very educational content. I have learned a lot about electronic manufacturing, some bits that I did not have clarity on. I really appreciate that. Thank you for a job well done. And obviously, there's a huge connect to what we do in electronics manufacturing, of course, with the partners that we work with, specifically Autodesk. Autodesk have been the biggest supporter of Gearbox and other Gearbox-like initiatives around the region, and they are our partner in manufacturing, offering certifications and training opportunities for many of our students within the academy, and would very much love to give them an opportunity also to showcase some of the amazing things that they're doing within that space. And in the call today, we have Matthew George from the Autodesk Africa team. who would very much love to give us a preview of what they've been up to and what they're doing with partners like Gearbox or otherwise across the region. So I'd like to hand over to Matthew. Matthew, are you on the call?
Hey Ian, how are you doing?
Very well, very well, very well, very well. Thank you so much, and thank you for making the time. We'd love to hear from you and give us a view on Fusion 360 and the many things that we're doing with Autodesk and within manufacturing and electronic manufacturing, specifically the region. Over to you.
Awesome, awesome stuff. It's thanks for the opportunity. Firstly, for inviting me to this webinar, and also thanks for the collaboration because I know Gearbox as a team and Kenya itself has been one of the best so far regarding in the electronics and as well as working with Autodesk. Regarding Fusion 360, I just want to put in a communication that there's a lot of new advances coming in Autodesk, especially with the extensions and especially with Fusion Connect, the new announcement from Autodesk, where IoT is so much the focus. So if you look at Fusion 360, it's basically a software that Autodesk provides that can do anything. So from your design, like Latif was saying, from your electronic design to your complete casing to complete prototyping to the final product. So this really is a game changer. And for those who are attending, just reach out to Gearbox, to Autodesk to know much more about this. As far from Autodesk perspective within the African continent, we are looking at our new products like the Fusion Lifecycle, which is now called the Fusion Manage. And I think it's also going to play a big role because regarding your bombs, regarding your like life cycle itself, it's a complete game changer. So looking forward to this year, guys, and thanks for the opportunity. Thanks, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Matthew George, for that, for giving us that overview on Fusion 360 as Gearbox Academy. Of course, with the partnership with the Autodesk team, we the one of the few, actually the only one manufacturing certified partner for manufacturing training for courtesy of Autodesk and Idea to together they are on this call to with us today. And we got into this partnership late last year, and we recently started training for the same. So if anyone is interested in getting themselves upskilled and certified within that space, specifically for Autodesk Fusion 360, Inventor, um, um, Card. I think those are our biggest and flagship Autodesk products that we're offering within the manufacturing sector. You'd want to learn a thing or two there. Gearbox Academy should be a top of mind one-stop shop for training on the same. We are also in partnership with Ideate offering software reselling services for anyone who would want to acquire the Autodesk or to acquire licensed Autodesk software for their use, personal or enterprise. Of course, our partnership with Ideate will grant you, your small business, or your school, or otherwise access the same, of course, at an affordable rate. Reach out to us if anyone has any need for the same. Nonetheless, I can see we're 11 minutes out of time. We had scheduled only 1 hour, a 1 hour session for this, and we really appreciate you guys making the time to participate in this call, ask your very engaging questions across the region, across the ecosystem, regulatory, and otherwise. Well, not to worry for those who are looking to get more. We'll share a recording for this to all your emails. You'll get them in the next day or two. And if anybody has a question or they would want to have a separate conversation, feel free to reach out to myself, Latif, or Miriam Vidiate on email to discuss further. Nonetheless, we want to appreciate you guys making the time wherever in the world you are. Stay safe, wear a mask, sanitize, and get vaccinated if possible, and take care of the ones who are around you and yourself. All right. It's been a pleasure hosting each and every one of you. I've been your host, Ian Mora, coming live from Gearbox HQ here in Avon Center, Nairobi. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of the week. Ciao.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great Easter weekend coming up. Be safe out there. Thanks. Done. Oh.